You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. I'm your host, Michael Cohen. Every episode, we dive deep with a special guest into a piece of pop culture they adore. What is a Perfect 10? I'm glad you asked. A Perfect 10 is a piece of pop culture media we love unconditionally. Is it objectively a 10 out of 10? Not necessarily, but to our guest, it's a masterpiece. So sit back, get comfy, and let's find some joy talking 10 Things I Hate About You with Ty Black. Ty, welcome back to Perfect 10 once again.
Hi.
we are rounding out our trilogy as we promised that we would. We're finishing off our Heath Ledger trilogy. When we started out doing A Knight's Tale, this was not a plan.
No.
But then when we did our second episode together and it was Casanova, it was like, well, now we've done two. We have to do a third one. Like like we are both fans of the Star Wars, and so if there's an opportunity to trilogize a thing, then we must do so. Right? It's a compulsion. So here we are. But the great thing about this is that, like, and we'll talk about this, there's a lot to connect these three movies and to create a trilogy around it. But I like that we're actually kind of going back to the beginning with Heath Ledger with this one. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's the start of Heath Ledger's like truly magnificent career. So it'll be a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think we because you've been on the podcast before and people know who you are and all that. I mean, if they don't, go check out Wit and Folly on YouTube and watch all of Ty's amazing videos analyzing all sorts of things, hero's journey, heroine's journey, all the awesome stuff that you do. But I think everybody knows you, so we can just like get right into it. I think we're good.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, no ado required. So before we get into it, let's start with the with the precursor. What is 10 Things I Hate About You? So here we go. Today we're stepping back into the hallowed halls of high school, the land of teenage drama, and a world of pre-internet shenanigans as we conclude our Heath Ledger trilogy with the 1999 teen comedy classic 10 Things I Hate About You. This contemporary adaptation of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew is a perfect blend of humor, heart, and teenage angst. Starring Heath Ledger, Julia Stiles, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and Larisa Oleynik, the film takes us on a roller coaster ride through the halls of Padua High, where rebellion, romance, and absurd mischief take center stage. From secret wagers to prom night fiascos, 10 Things I Hate About You is more than just a teen comedy. It's a timeless tale of the unpredictable nature of love. So whether you're reliving the 90s nostalgia or discovering this gem for the first time, grab your favorite crop top, silence your beeper, and get ready for a perfect 10 exploration of love, laughter, and hijinks as we celebrate the nonsensical magic of teen romance. Did I capture it? Did I encapsulate 10 Things I Hate About You?
I 100% think so. And it's funny thinking about the 90s nostalgia factor because I've seen this movie so many times, even, beyond the 90s, beyond the early 2000s. And it's still something that I'm like, I can feel like being there. It doesn't feel foreign. It doesn't feel nostalgic necessarily to me. It just kind of feels like it's kind of a part of me as of now. So yeah, it's always wacky to me to see people talk about the nostalgia of it. It's interesting.
The movie when it starts, right? Because I think it's like the Touchstone logo or whatever, and it starts with like this obnoxious guitar riff situation, and then that sort of transitions. It fades into a song that immediately places us in
Yes.
time where we are, and that's 1 week by the Bare Naked Ladies. And
Yes.
I like Crystal and I were sitting to watch this last night to prep, and this is one of her favorite movies of all time. Like this actually, I think it might be her favorite movie of all time. It's difficult. She never wants to quantify that stuff, but
Yeah.
like I think it might be. Um,
That's a good one to have as your
it
favorite.
is.
Like,
It is.
it's definitely like in my top 10 for sure.
Yeah. And it like I like lost it. Like I like the Bare Naked Ladies started playing, and I was like, this movie is so great. Like
Yeah.
already this is I am having the best time. And I granted I've seen this movie like over 10 times, right?
Yeah.
Like but it is one that like she had on DVD when we first started dating 1,000 years ago. I It's all 19 years ago. I She had like 4 DVDs and this was one of them. And
Nice.
yeah, like she would put it on constantly. Like we would put it on and then basically go to sleep, like fall asleep with it playing.
Oh.
Um, and so like I've obviously seen it a million times, but it has been a very long time since I've sat down and watched it. And
Yeah.
so that music hit and I was like, holy crap. And then it does like the pan down to the four girls in the you know,
The convertible.
convertible,
Yeah.
you know, sort of Jeep-ish type vehicle.
Yeah.
Very Zoolander-ish, right? Like that's what Zoolander was making fun of when Zoolander came out, because this was like the thing. I mean, it's a Mean
Yeah.
Girls half a decade later comes along and like makes fun of this as well, right? Like
Yeah.
this idea
It's
of the girl,
iconic.
yeah, like but this is it's so funny because so many of the things that are in this movie are the things that like are lampooned later on, but
Yes.
this movie is actually sincere with it. Like
Mhm.
this is one of the places where it comes from. So
Mhm.
it was just really funny to watch it with that context, with that sort of
Right.
like that 90s nostalgia lens of like, oh yeah, like this is actually where those tropes
Come from,
originate,
yeah.
right? Which
Absolutely. Yeah.
there are not a lot of things that you can look back at and go like, oh, this actually like created the trope, like this, like and this era 1999. I mean, you're talking about this is the same year that She's All That came out. I know that for a fact because one of my greatest jokes in the history of my goofing off in public was in the lineup for the Phantom Menace, and they're right about to. This was back in the day. For the younger listeners, um, you had to stand in a lineup outside of the movie theater.
Yep.
And then they would sell you tickets like right before the movie started. You didn't buy them on your phone, um, 3 months in advance. Um, so we're all lined up. We've been lined up since noon that day to see the Phantom Menace. I lived in a small town, so it wasn't as crazy as it was other places. But we've been there all day. We've ordered pizza to the line. Like all of that sort of craziness has happened. It's like 11:45, right? And the person from the theater comes out and is like, oh, so in a few minutes we're gonna do this, blah blah blah, and you guys are all gonna get to see Star Wars, and everybody cheers. It's this loud, huge cheer, and then it dies down, and I'm standing next to a poster for the movie She's All That, and I go, you mean this isn't the lineup for She's All That? And a few people laugh, but I know that that's one of the funniest jokes that I've ever made.
That's
It just it
hilarious.
went I think it maybe went over some people's heads,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was, yeah. So I know like 1999, it's like that, The Matrix,
Yeah.
The Phantom Menace, like that's where we're living, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
like this is the like the pinnacle, the peak of teen drama comedies,
Yeah.
these teen dramedies, right? And this one,
Mhm.
I think actually, I never saw it in the theater. I only ever saw it after the fact on VHS,
Mhm.
actually, not even on DVD.
Yep.
Rented it from the Blockbuster.
Yep.
I I but yeah, like this along with like She's All That and a few others. Um
Mhm.
that like they set these templates. It's like when I when I the when the bet happens, right? Well, like there's
Yeah.
two moments, because there's the first one where he's like, I like, I'll bet you I could blah blah blah, and then it's like we're not gonna do that, and then but then later on there is like another wager of like you can't do this sort of thing, and then paying somebody off. It's like, is it a teen movie if there isn't a bet or a wager or money somehow changing hands in relation to losing your virginity or
Right.
dating a girl that doesn't want to be dated, or
Right.
like they all like
It
it's
all
in
has
every
that.
single one of them. um
Yep, it is.
women
Definitely.
were I definitely being treated as objects in these
Yeah.
films, but
Yeah.
we didn't, well, we knew better, but
Hmm.
like we didn't quite know better yet, like it was a step on the path towards understanding that this was maybe not the best way to treat female characters in your stories, but
Right. Yeah.
but it's a staple of the genre for sure, is like, oh, but you can't get her to kiss you, and then it just escalates from there.
Yeah. Well, it does make it. This one, it's funny because, yeah, like you said, there are a lot of other movies and other stories that do the same thing, especially within like a high school teen setting,
Mhm.
even in college ones. But this does make it more complicated, uh, because it's not just about like the bet or whatever. It's not just about like, oh yeah, I could need the money or whatever. It is totally hinging upon Bianca and Kat's relationship and the role
Mhm.
that their father sets. So there is a like kind of between the lines message of that Bianca is actually the one who is doing all of this, right? She's the reason for the money exchanging hands for her sister. And she's the one controlling these men to try to get what she wants, which is, and she's ultimately using them to get, you know, Joey, the popular guy.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit, it is between the lines and it is kind of running underneath like the current of the story, but there is a lot of interesting, I think, feminist viewpoints in this, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that it is written by two women. So so yeah, do we want to give the context of like how this movie got made, because it
Yeah.
does, I think you touched on some of it too, like the 1990s, or it's at least the script was written in, I think, probably the early 1990s or the mid 1990s. And it was obviously adapted a lot because they couldn't sell it. It was written by Kristen Smith and Karen McCullough. These are the same women who wrote like Ella Enchanted, which is another one of my favorite movies of all time. Legally Blonde, The House Bunny. Like they are very talented comedy
Mhm.
writers, and they write about women, and they have some of the most iconic, written moments in film regarding women, and it's just great. They are very strange. I like watched a few interviews with them. They're both very strange. They're like, they're older women. They've been writing a really long time. They're kind of like these older, you know, first, second wave feminists.
Yeah.
And so they're writing typically younger girls from their perspective. And I just think it obviously worked for the time that they were writing a lot. They're still writing, but they're not, it's not as like iconic as it was during this time period, but they definitely hit some notes that a lot of younger women related to. So that says something about what they were doing. And also, like, they used a director for this movie, Gil, can't remember his last name. He
Gil
actually,
Younger.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he did a lot of comedies during that time, a lot of comedy shows like Ellen. He was a director on, and he was a very, very, very successful comedy director for years, even after this movie. And he brought a lot of like the slapstick stuff. So he was the one who came up with like the motorcycle incident and the arrow in the butt, you know?
Hmm.
So, and the writers were like, okay, like, cause, they had been selling their script for so long. It was like all right, if that's what, if that's what you want this movie to be, then sure. So they did not have a lot of that like slapstick comedy in there, but he added it, and I
Mhm.
think it's a great pairing uh, in the movie because it really does come together in like a wacky, ridiculous way, just perfect for a teen movie, or at least that's what established the wackiness that we get in all the teen movies afterwards. Like this is kind of this merging of these two ideas about
Mhm.
these two women writing about how difficult and how challenging it is to be a girl in this time, and then putting that together with this slapstick comedy is just, it's so perfect. So this was like the first acting gig for pretty much all these actors, or not the first acting gig. This was like the one that kind of catapulted all of them into stardom.
Mhm.
They had all done like smaller projects before, and the only one that was on something notable was Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He was on Third Rock from the Sun. And in order to convince him to be in the movie, they told him that he was going to be the Han Solo of the film. That's how they like described it to him, which I mean, that's arguable. I would say that he would actually be the Luke of the film, but
Yeah.
but that's apparently what convinced him to come on to it. And I mean, obviously we needed him in that movie. He's perfect.
Yeah. But
So
but that's funny because like that's how you get Luke to do something too, is that you tell him that he'll be the Han Solo of it, and then Luke will do it, right? Like you can't tell Luke that he'll be the Luke because Luke doesn't want to be Luke. Luke wants to be Han, right? Like,
yeah.
but the thing about Han is that Han is only ever pretending to be Han and is never actually Han to begin with, which is why Heath Ledger's character is the Han Solo of this movie, because he's
Yep.
introduced as a ne'er-do-well, and it turns out that he's actually like, he is a feminist, like
Yep.
I good guy with a heart of gold, right? And it's
Right.
like,
He's
yeah,
just
so
misunderstood. Yeah.
he is actually Han Solo. Like,
Yeah.
that's so funny.
Yeah, and we'll get into more of like this idea of like expectations versus reality, and then the irony and the
Mm,
sarcasm that kind of comes with the source material. It's really fascinating. There's a lot of like playing with tropes and a lot of misdirection, in both the original source material and in the movie, and the way they rewrote it. It's really interesting. Uh, Another thing I wanted to mention was that it was Julia Stiles' like choice to cry during the poem reading.
mm,
They didn't write it that way. They had kind of written it more as like a more of like a staunch admission, that a reluctant admission. Whereas when Julia went to go read it, she just immediately started breaking down in tears during the filming, and they were like, "This is great. This is great. Keep doing that." And then also that the writers were told that they had to get rid of the mom. So the mom was Kat and Bianca's mom was actually in the uh, kind of final edition of the script before it was being produced. And the studio said, we have to give another reason for why Kat is so bitchy.
mm.
Let's get rid of the mom. Let's have the mom have left them. And that's why she's so bitter. And initially Karen and Kristen were like, well, this is just pure misogyny. Like you're
Yeah.
telling us that women can't, be angry at the world for simply being against them. Like they can't be angry simply for being women. And all the other things that happen to Kat too that are already baked into the script with Joey, and
Mhm.
just for the fact that Kat is a, third wave feminist, and she is reading things that are not being taught in school, and that it makes her angry. And the studio was like, no, we have to have a more like Freudian
Yeah.
reason for why she's so mad. But they cut it because they wanted the movie to get made, because that's how things work, especially in 1999. So yeah, so that's kind of the behind the scenes of how the film got made. And with that, I want to segue into like the Taming of the Shrew,
Mhm.
because I was like, I was a huge Shakespeare fan when I was a kid. And when I got into a Shakespeare company, like I, was involved in like the first Shakespeare company in my hometown. And, you know, we studied and we did the acting stuff. We went to festivals and performed and all of that. And I think I was in middle school, so I was pretty young. And when I found out that there were movies that were adapted from Shakespeare, I was like, this is awesome. So started, you know, watching anything I could get my hands on that was like an adaptation. And even the ones that were like staying true to the material,
Mhm.
anything that was on film, I wanted to watch it, because, you know, we didn't have a lot of culture where I'm from. So there wasn't a lot of plays, unless you went, you know, into the city, which is where the Shakespeare Company was. But yeah, so the Taming of the Shrew is funny. I had always known it to be kind of like Shakespeare's most misogynistic play, but that's really, I think, uh, an unfair judgment against it, because Shakespeare was like incredibly in touch with the way that the common class thought, the way that they watched farce, you know, farce
Mhm.
and sarcasm and irony and all these things are, you know, that was kind of the peak of comedy during his time. And a lot of the times, like, we try to look back on some of his plays with a lens, a perspective from today. And that's just not, if you ignore the context, you're not understanding how people actually watched the play.
Yeah.
So allow me to give some context of The Taming of the Shrew, which, like I said, is considered to be Shakespeare's most misogynistic play. It starts out with like a frame story. This is pretty common. It's a tale within a tale where a beggar slash drunkard named Christopher Sly, he's, you know, drinking at a pub, and this nobleman is kind of, you know, poking fun at him, and he tries to convince this guy that he was actually a nobleman too, and that he had simply lost his memory. He had forgotten what his life was. And they stage a play for the beggar, for the drunkard, for Christopher Sly, to show him everything that he's forgotten about his life. And it's played up, you know, very, very, very much as a farce. It's played up as like, this man is kind of lying to him. He's making fun of him. And then the rest of, or pretty much all of the rest of the play, is the play within a play, about supposedly Christopher Sly's life. So automatically, as the audience is watching this, they can see that, you know, if it's a play within a play, a story within a story, you're automatically questioning the validity of it.
Mhm.
It's a big fish story. It's an exaggeration, right? And Sly is actually like, it's being shown that the main character of Patrick, who's, you know, Patrick in 10 Things, his name is Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew. By the very end of the play, essentially he's being convinced that he's the master of his wife, right? He's tamed the shrew, but Christopher Sly has neither a wife nor any authority of any kind. So this is a male fantasy. It's male wish fulfillment. And that's how the audience would have reacted to it. So
Mhm.
about the misogynistic stuff, essentially the story is about Petruchio, Patrick, uh, who initially pretends that Catherine, Cat, her words don't bother him. You know, and the whole thing, the frame is exactly the same. The structure of the story is essentially the same as 10 Things I Hate About You. There's the, you know, Bianca cannot marry until her sister marries thing. Both of the men pretend to be tutors to the women in order to woo them. And what Petruchio does to get Catherine to fall in love with him is he doesn't let any of her words hurt him. He just like lets it roll off his back. He's like, it's not a big deal. Uh, and he continues to just allow her to be how she is, which is great for her, you know. And she's like, oh, this man actually accepts me for who I am. So they get married. And then as soon as they get married, he drops the mask. and he withholds food and drink from her in order to make her compliant. He literally like tames her and gets her to accept him as her master and her king. So this is where a lot of critics get kind of thrown off, because this is clearly misogynistic behavior. It's really messed up. But like I said, the audience is understandably reading this as a farce.
Mm-hmm.
It's a falsehood. And it's, ultimately it's pure irony. Like Kate's final speech to the audience, which is a parallel to, like 10 things with her final poem, where she lists the 10 things that she hates about him. Her final speech is essentially instructing the women in the audience. It's to the audience. It's saying that you should be submissive to your husband and you should see them as your king. And this is like a tiny little excerpt from it. She says, "I'm ashamed that women are so simple to offer war when they should kneel for peace, or to seek for rule, supremacy, and sway when they are bound to serve, love, and obey." But the reigning monarch of the time was Queen Elizabeth I. So, like, they knew, like, literally they are being ruled by a woman right now, all of them. So this could not be taken seriously. So the reality and the message of the play, which ends on this note, it ends with this speech, is that this type of dominant, submissive, male-female relationship, it really only exists in fiction. And it's neither sustainable nor is it ethical to have such a power imbalance in any relationship. So yeah, so that's the that's the source material that we're working with here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like that would have been a condemnation of the church, right? Like, because that's where that messaging would have been coming from at that time, is that because the women needing to be quiet and subservient and all of that, like that is very it's actually wild misinterpretation of the text from the New Testament, but I because it is people of that era not understanding historical context, and then it's us not understanding the historical context of them not understanding the historical context.
Yes.
Which is funny because like what you're seeing there is like this ideology like 2 steps removed.
Yeah, it's really smart, and it's complicated for its time. It's complicated for like what it's dealing with and what the message are that it's trying to get across. Because if you can imagine, if you've ever seen a Shakespeare play and how it's actually played, you can imagine these characters being super over the top with their acting compared to like with Romeo and Juliet, which is, a tragedy where you have a little bit more sincerity to how they're speaking and how they're saying things about how they love each other. Whereas, Catherine's final speech is going to be something way over the top. Saying to these women, you should look at your husband as your master and your king, and you should obey him. And the women in the audience are laughing probably at this whole thing, or scoffing, right?
Yeah.
And that keys in, to everyone else that's watching. Oh, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely absurd, because it is. And that's what it's supposed to be. But there have been lots of, like I said, there's lots of interpretations and lots of, talk about what The Taming of the Shrew does successfully and not. And then also how, adaptations have handled the source material. There have been adaptations like in the 1960s where, they've done a up-to-date adaptation of the story, and they have very, very much in the style of the 1960s. The woman kind of falls into his arms, and or the Catherine character falls into Petruchio's arms and is like, I'm finally given to you. You are my master. You are my king, kind of thing. And clearly, that's the wrong interpretation of the text. But then you have 10 things that that steps away from the frame within a frame story. It steps away from the sarcasm, but it maintains the irony. And the irony is that of young love and teenage angst, and all those fun things, which we'll definitely talk more about. So yeah, how did you feel about kind of like the, I wouldn't say misdirection. I know you've seen it a lot of times, but
Mhm.
uh, from the point of view of like how they messed with stereotypes and expectations and all of that. Like, we talked about how it's similar to other teen movies, but how is it different? Do you feel like
Yeah.
there's a lot of differences?
Well, I think like what you were talking about, and the idea that like from a dramaturgical perspective, when we look at the original source material, it's a farce, and it's meant to be played in this very like over the top arch way. That's
Mhm.
where I think the director, where Jurgen comes in and goes like, we need to make the world absurd, right?
Yeah.
And the characters start absurd. All of our characters start very arch, right? Like they're all
Yeah.
like I really Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character at the beginning, Cameron, he shows up, he arrives on the scene, and he instantly falls in love with this girl. Like just
I burn, I
instantly.
pine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the more that I thought about it sort of since last night, I'm like, he has no character. He has absolutely zero character. The only thing we know about him, I made the joke like sort of towards the end of the movie to Crystal, where I was like, none of these people have parents except for this dad. Like
Yeah.
he's the only real adult in the
Yeah.
entire story, because all of the other adults, the teachers certainly are cartoonish to say the least, right?
Right.
Like they're it's everything in this world is there to tell us that this is not real, like this isn't
Yeah.
reality. Like, hey, heads up, this is silly, this is a cartoon, right?
Yeah.
um
Which
and
makes
so
people more of it gives people more like extreme
yeah,
traits. Like if you see it like that, yeah, it's
and
more
it allows
clear.
us, I think it allows us to let go a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
when things are played dramatically, when things are played for realism, then our brain starts going, it's the uncanny valley thing, right? It's like our brain
Mhm.
starts trying to find the flaws with the story, whereas with this, it's like the story is intentionally and inherently flawed, right? Like
Right.
because it is a farce, and because it is trying to point out to you that the way things are not it's not correct, right? Like
Right.
if you took that logic and you pushed it to its extreme, then you start to see how silly it actually is, right?
Right.
uh
Which is how that connects. Yeah, that's
yeah,
yeah, that's
so I
they
think
do
like
it
that
so well.
his direction in that sense is the thing. I think it's the difference between this being another teen movie,
Mhm.
where like I like She's All That, I like American Pie, I like those movies, they're fun. I don't necessarily want to watch them, right? But
Yeah.
with this, the Shakespeare angle of it, but then beyond that, that direction, and that world, I think is what ends up making something so very placed at a specific point in time
Right.
still timeless, because it's all a caricature of the time period, of the source material, of the subject matter, of the character tropes and archetypes, right? Like everything is up for scrutiny
Mhm.
in the sense that like it's all like we can laugh at anything in this movie. um
Yeah. That's true. Everyone is made fun of to an extent. Everyone
yeah,
is flawed. You can laugh at yeah, you can laugh at Bianca, you cannot laugh at Kat because they're all extremes. They're all stereotypes at the beginning. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like Cameron is so puppy dog throughout
Yes.
the whole thing. and the scene in the party when it like just sort of sits on him with that sad face where it's like he looks like he's about to cry, but he looks like he's about to cry because his ice cream fell on the ground, not because he's in love with this girl, right? Like, but that's kind of the point, is that he is so dopey and innocent.
Yeah.
He's like this pure soul in this very almost like cynical scenario, right?
Yeah.
Everybody else is a cynic, but
Hmm.
he is he but it's like he's meant to be the everyman of the story, right? Like we look
Right.
at Patrick, we look at the Petruchio character, and it's like very similar to Casanova. It's very similar
Hmm.
William in A Knight's Tale, where it's like he's this aspirational character, right?
Right.
um where he's very much the Han Solo, right?
Hmm.
Whereas Cameron is the Luke Skywalker, who is the everyman, the Peter Parker, right? That
Yeah.
like Peter Parker works because nothing ever works out for this guy, but he still gets up and he still keeps going and he still tries, right? So when he has his
Yeah.
moment of like telling Bianca off in the car, it's like we're there with him because we're like you've just walked all over this poor guy. Like he doesn't deserve it.
Yep.
All he's asked for is a chance, right? Like
Hmm.
and you've lied to him this whole time, sort of thing. And so, when she kisses him, then we cheer, which like really, if you look at it on its face, it's like that it actually like she's actually kind of the worst, right? In
Yeah.
real life, it's like, so you treated him like garbage, and then when the other guy turned out to not be what you wanted, then he's your backup, he's a default, right? Like
Right.
um,
Or
oh,
yeah,
lucky you that he's still there for you to
I
manipulate,
mean,
right? Like,
right, right. And I think obviously what it's attempting to happen, and you can only really see it if you compare the other things that are going on in the story. Like you have Pat, or you have Patrick and Kat, and you have Bianca and Cameron, and their relationships are like mirroring each other in a weird
mhm,
way. Because when Cameron finally calls out Bianca on her bad behavior, she reacts with, "Oh my God, you finally have been truthful with me," whereas most people, like, they want me to be a certain way, so I act a certain way, and then like we just kind of all are fake. Everybody's
yeah,
fake in her world, except for her sister. And then you have like Kat and Patrick, and as soon as like they start being real with each other, they go at each other's throats. They're angry, and it's really interesting because it shows you that like it's kind of this way of like breaking down their to get to vulnerability. You have to poke at each other, and that's the only way that you can like really, you know find common ground, and it's the only way that you can open yourself up to love. And for Bianca it was really easy because he already loved her. Cameron already loved her, and Cameron
mhm,
was very simple in his affections, and Bianca's very simple in her affections too. She just wants someone to take care of her and to love her and to be there for her. Whereas like Kat and Patrick are a lot more, they've been a lot more jaded by the world. They have a lot more walls built up. So as soon as one of them takes a chisel to it, the other one, is like, whoa, 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 hold on. Like, don't you try to change me. So yeah, I think within the context, it's it's clearly a good thing. But you're right. There are some things you're like,
yeah.
well, hold on there. That's not really fair.
Yeah, it's fine. I think the difference is like the with the younger ones, it's they're both looking for acceptance, and
Yeah.
then with Kat and Patrick, they're both looking for challenge, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's what they
Like
need in a relationship, right?
yeah, because the Cameron and Bianca are very insecure and unsure of themselves. So what
Right.
they need is somebody to say it's okay, you are who you are, and that's why I love you.
Hmm.
Whereas with Kat and Patrick, it's like they're very, as she says, like you're very self assured, and that's what I tell myself every morning, right? That was just such a great joke. Um, but like that's the thing, is that they actually, what they need is somebody who can knock them off the pedestal a little bit,
Yeah.
um in order to keep them humble, right? Like that's the balance of the relationship. That's where it's like that's in the intro I wrote that it was about the unpredictable nature of love, right? Like that's one of those things, is that it starts as a job. He's being paid to fall in love with her, or to date her, and then it accidentally falls in love with her, finds out that like
Hmm.
this is it's his perfect match, it's his other half, right?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
is like that. I think that is often the nature of relationships that last, is that you can start in a place of I don't know about this person, right? But then as you get to know them, and they fit into your life, you find that it's like, oh, this person ultimately ultimately, this is my perspective on it, the person that you're with should be a person that makes you a better person, right?
Yes.
um
Yeah.
they
Definitely.
should challenge you where you need to be challenged, and support you where you need to be supported.
Hmm.
And that's really the most important thing in a relationship from my
Yeah.
perspective. So that,
It's really complicated getting there, but
yeah.
it's really simple to like maintain. Uh, and I think that's like the funny part about, you know, teen teens falling in love, these stories, these fictional stories that we all are so drawn to,
Mhm.
is that it paints the part that is so complicated, and they wrap it up with a beautiful bow. They present it like, yeah, it's complicated, but it's also really simple. And
Yeah.
here it is in an hour and 30 minutes, like
Yeah.
it is taking those complex feelings and those things that are like really ironic and don't make any sense, and just saying, okay, yeah, but sometimes it is really just as simple as like, being true to yourself, being vulnerable with each other, and allowing yourself to feel your feelings. So yeah, I love that. I love, romantic comedies with young people. They always do that, and it's always so much fun. Another thing I wanted to like touch on, and I probably should have touched on this in the kind of more of the behind the scenes type of stuff, but just like for quick kind of context, because I think it's important to talk about. We've kind of touched on it a little bit.
Mm.
The the race and feminism stuff in the film is so wacky. Right now, like watching it last night, I was like, wow, this does not this probably does not hit the right tone. I don't know if that's like, I know that even then it probably didn't hit the right tone for a lot of people, but for me, and I think for a lot of people who watched it back in like, the early 2000s, uh it was probably one of my first forays into white feminism,
Mm.
and what that meant, cuz Mr. Morgan calls it out very early on
Yeah.
in the film. And then also, just in general, like, topics of intersectionality, like even without knowing that word back then, that this is probably the first time, that's been kind of proposed in a film that I watched. And during that time, uh there was a lot of stuff going on about like how young girls did not have the same opportunities as young men. And this was a realization for a lot of feminists, and this brought on like, third wave feminism, that all of the work that, first wave feminism tried to do was not holding up because people weren't doing the work,
Mm.
and so you had a lot of, because it was the 90s, you had a lot of like consumerist and capitalistic uh solutions. So we had a lot of money thrown at young women, and a lot of money targeted, like a lot of, stuff targeted towards young women and girls. You had like, Limited 2 and Babysitters Club, American Girl dolls. You had movies centered on girls. All of a sudden you had Virgin Suicides and Man in the Moon, and like some of this intersects with like the 80s a little bit, but this is like the girlhood phenomenon, like that was a thing back then.
Mhm.
And on third wave feminism, they're coming back and they're saying like we still have a lot of work to do. And Kat in the movie, she's reading The Bell Jar, which is, from first wave, and she also, clearly has read The Feminine Mystique. There's that cute scene where they're in the bookstore and she gives him the book he was looking for.
Yeah.
And that's also, first wave feminism. So Kat is reconnecting kind of like with the mothers of first wave feminism, and she's trying to like do her part, but she is actually more reminiscent of like the second wave feminism, which is known, or it's accused of being kind of mainly for white suburban women.
Mhm.
So, and that's what she is. She is a, suburban white woman. So it's kind of doing a lot of things at once in terms of like showing that she is flawed and she still has a lot to learn. Uh, but she has exposed herself to enough knowledge that she's angry at the world for not uh not changing as quickly as she wants it to change in order to accommodate her beliefs. So just it's really fascinating that it does that, because again, if you're not if you grew up in a household like I did, uh I wouldn't have never been exposed to anything like that. And
Mhm.
10 Things was just one of those movies that had to it actually garnered enough attention, and with that PG-13 rating could be on television at any time. And of course, I was exposed to it because of that. So yeah, it gets a lot of flack, and it should. People should be critical, but just to give that perspective, I find it really interesting that it was able to push topics like that, and that Kristen and Karen were able to kind of get those through
Mhm.
whenever when they had to cut so much else from the script. So
Yeah, it is really funny because it's set in Seattle, so it's the Pacific
yeah.
Northwest. This is the region that I am from. Obviously I'm in Canada, but culturally we're very similar, Vancouver to
Yeah.
Seattle. Um, so like the cultural breakdown, like when he does the breakdown of all of the groups, right? And it's like, oh, those guys are the cowboys, and it's like I don't know how common that was for other people, for other areas, but like that is definitely a thing in this region of like you've got these kids that like have grown up in the city their entire lives. They got to drive 45 minutes to even see a horse, but they have this like attitude that like, oh, because they live in a city that was 100 years ago a rural area, like because sprawl has like made it out there, but like there's still this identity that like that part of town is so far away.
Yeah.
um and it's like there's a Walmart and a Starbucks on every corner, like you guys live in the city. And
That's
yet they
so
are still
funny.
cowboys. And then the Rasta thing, which is just like
Yeah.
called out so many times, and it's so good. It's like that stuff is so relatable for me. Like I look at that and it's like calling out like these white guys who they go the Rasta angle, which I think
Hmm.
makes it more comical, right?
Hmm.
That like they've got the Jamaican accents and
And the
the
dreads.
and the dreads, and like they look like Bob Marley, right? Like, but they're white
Right.
guys.
Right.
Whereas I think really at the time what that was more speaking to was like the white suburban males, right? that
Hmm.
were that
Hmm.
were into like gangster rap and stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
having absolutely no understanding of the context of that, and yet like their entire identity was built around it.
Oh yeah,
um
I think that was probably, yeah, that what you're talking about, that stereotype was probably more common through
yeah.
all of America. It's funny because I grew up in the South, and I would say it was really wild to see like the Seattle stereotypes, because no, we did not have any of those like at
Yeah.
all. We did not have like the pretend cowboys. We actually had like actual kids that were in the rodeo,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
wrangling cattle and stuff. My cousin was, in Future Farmers of America,
Yeah.
and showing pigs and stuff. So yeah, it's really, again, it's kind of like a little bit of that escapist thing. I love the fact that it's set in Seattle, because um it was so foreign. It seemed like a different world.
It's
And I think the actual high school they shot at was actually in Tacoma. I found that out.
yeah.
It's in Tacoma, Washington. So it's a
Yeah.
real high school.
Yep. Yep. Real play. Real. Yeah. Everywhere that like they shot it all in. Seattle and the area, right? Tacoma
Yeah.
is like about an hour north of Seattle or south of Seattle, but
Yeah.
so not Seattle proper. But it's funny because there's the moment when they're like on the paddle boats, and where they are in order to get that shot because they want like downtown Seattle and the Space Needle in the shot. It's like they're in like the middle of Puget Sound, like very far away from land, and like I know that because I have driven through Seattle a billion times. So I'm looking at it going like, you guys are really, really, really far out into the water. Like you should not be that far away from land. I mean, you can see a marina not that far away from them, but even still, it's like
Oh, even I
who's
thought that when we were watching it last time.
who's renting you these paddle boats? And then the other part of it is that like they're very clearly on a like a jig, which like
Yes.
normally you would expect that for like a driving scene, right? It's like
Hmm.
where they put basically a car with no wheels on a flatbed, and then they set up all of the cameras and stuff, and then the flatbed truck is driving, but from our perspective we just see the back, like from the front of the
Yeah.
car out the back, right? So it
Right.
looks like that's the car that's driving. They do the same thing with this. So they're pedaling, and they're pedaling like crazy. Like Heath Ledger is pedaling so much faster than Julia Stiles, which would put that they'd be going in a circle.
Yeah.
They aren't
Yeah.
moving at all. They don't go anywhere because then you
Yep.
see the paddle boat go back like behind them, and the
Hmm.
people behind them are pedaling at like half the speed they are, and they're like clipping across, like they're going across the water so quick. And it's like if Heath Ledger was really pedaling that fast, that thing would just be spinning in a circle like crazy.
I thought
um
the same thing. I had never
so
noticed it
funny.
before. And last time we watched it, I was like, this is really
Yeah.
awkward. Like, I'm noticing all these like technical things.
Yeah. And
Oh,
then
it was so
there's
funny.
there's also this scene with Cameron and Bianca. This I'm just being like a hey, I live in the Pacific Northwest. When they're at the Fremont Troll, and it's like, first
Right.
of all, if you live in Tacoma, the Fremont Troll is like an hour and a half, 2 hours away. Because like Fremont is in Seattle technically, but it's like a neighborhood of Seattle, but it's like into like this like suburban area of Seattle. Like it's across the so there's like a highway. It's kind of a bridge. It goes, it's really, really high up.
Hmm.
Um to get into the city, and it's like it's just north of Seattle, but it's like in order to get into Fremont, it's like you either got to go through downtown Seattle through the circuitous route to get there, or you have to go on the highway, and the highway's a nightmare. So it's like these children these
Yeah.
15, 16 year olds have like driven like 2 hours away from their home to go sit and have a conversation next to the Fremont Troll. It's so funny. It's like when they film stuff in San Francisco, and it's like you see like the car chases in San Francisco are notorious for this. Shang-Chi's really bad, where it's like you'll get people do a breakdown, and it's like this shot to this shot they just traveled 45 minutes. Like
Oh yeah.
it's like the
Yeah.
same sort of thing, as if Seattle is this small town. Seattle's a very, like, especially when you include Tacoma, if you include like Tacoma, Bellevue, Renton, like these other areas, it's very, very big. It's a very big sprawl. And
Yeah.
it is such a pain to get around because the Pacific Northwest is all mountains and water. So
Yeah. That
everything's
makes
like
sense.
built in these circuitous ways of like, unless you've got a highway that cuts straight through it. If you've got a highway that cuts straight through it, it always has traffic. So you don't take that.
Right.
But yeah, that's just that's the local perspective, is like, I watch it and I'm like, where are you guys, like, how are you, why are you there? Like, it's so absurd, but
Yep, yep. I could say
it's
the
still,
same thing with DC stuff. There's a lot of
yeah,
shows that are supposed to be in DC, and you watch it and you're like somebody who works at, the NSA or the CIA, and then they're like biking to work and they're passing the Capitol building, and you're like, wait a minute,
yeah,
that's not true.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, too funny. Okay, where were we?
Yeah, we were talking about the context, the race and feminism stuff, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I think that was pretty much all on that topic. Yeah, but yeah, to summarize, it was just like it was a time where
yeah,
a lot of stories were being marketed towards girls. They were about girlhood, about the things that women go through. It was considered to be something that could make money.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, with this movie, you have kind of the central, like, it's funny because we talked about Casanova, we talked about The Knight's Tale previously, and those stories are Heath Ledger's stories.
Hmm.
He is the main character. Whereas in this one, Kat and her sister are the main characters, and their sisterhood, their relationship, that is the heart of the film. And it's kind of what, even though they have their own relationships with their prospective, suitors, uh, their relationship together is what actually makes those other relationships possible, because they have to they have to kind of reconcile things between themselves before they can, love other people. And I think that's just really beautiful.
Hmm.
um and it is, like I said, it's a part of that time where studios were buying these scripts that were about girls and girlhood. So one of the other things this relates to is Kat's kind of, it's Kat's story. Ultimately, she's the main character. Her relationship to music is something that I never really thought about until this rewatch, because I wasn't, a teen during this time, but a big part of this time period was kind of coming off of uh, the wave of feminism that included lots of femme punk bands and women pushing themselves into uh, like areas in which they were typically considered unwelcome, or they were creating their own spaces.
Hmm.
And obviously it's not the first time they created their own spaces, but this is kind of the first time where those spaces were getting really big. And punk music especially was, a space that women created for themselves. Like, they had all female rock bands, all female punk bands. And one of the things that Patrick says, in the movie, is they're just a bunch of girls who can't play their instruments.
Hmm.
And this is very immediately afterwards kind of debunked, I guess, when he goes into kind of like this lioness's den of all women who are rocking out to music. It's funny to me that the band that they got is a female. She's, the lead is a female singer, but the band itself is all men. I thought that was
Yeah.
like, I was like, oh, well, that doesn't quite live up to. I doubt that's what they wanted. Like, I'm sure they wanted like an all female band, but the message still comes across with all of the women in the venue. And this is also kind of like music and this kind of escape into music. Like, this is Kat's way of escaping judgment and escaping the expectations that are put on her. It's a place where she can like totally be herself. And I think a lot of women like can relate to that. A lot of people in general can relate to that, but especially from the perspective of, I don't like to use the word girlhood because of the implications it has now, but for that time, and like in the 90s, when they were exploring more of like what girlhood was, or how it was different, how the experience of girls growing up was different from the experience of boys. Those are the kinds of things that they were exploring, which was like, the fact that spaces created for women were safer for them, and they, the kinds of areas, the kind of spaces they made for themselves and all of that, it was all this is all very new, um or at least it was new in the straight uh white woman atmosphere.
Hmm.
So going into this, like I called it like a lioness's den, uh Patrick and Kat kind of both let the mask slip for like a split second. And even though Patrick is kind of like he's kind of pretending to be this one way. He's pretending like the things that she says don't bother him, all that kind of thing, right? Just as like Petruchio does in Taming of the Shrew. Uh, that moment of vulnerability where, he and it's not even vulnerability. There's a moment of truthfulness, I guess, because Patrick knows the bartender and he's clearly been there, and he clearly like he even says like I can't be seen there or whatever. He knows this place, he knows this person. He clearly knows like the owners or whatever because he
Mhm.
calls in a favor at the end. And that part about him is kind of like it's intriguing because it shows you that like he like the way that he's like kind of like living his life is a farce. Like it's
Yeah.
not really truly who he is. So yeah, so that's the first time they kind of both let the mask slip, and that kind of theme of music being this escape for Kat and being a place where she can truly be herself does go throughout the film with like her dancing at the party and just totally just completely forgetting who she is, who she's trying to be, all that kind of stuff. And then also at whenever she's playing the guitar, she also admits to Patrick that she wants to be in a band. Like, I could do this, I could play in a band, which is, I think it's great. It's basically it's the first time that she voices that to someone, possibly. And because she voices it, she immediately follows up on it. All of a sudden she's made it a reality. And that's when she goes to the music store and starts playing, I think it's a bass, um, and thinking, oh, I could actually do this. So I think that that's a very forward thinking, progressive part of the story that I really like, is the uh, music being inspirational and creative kind of energy. So
Yeah, I think it also possibly comes out of the setting a little bit, because
oh yeah, Seattle.
the bands that are featured in it are, I think it's Letters to Cleo and Save Ferris, right? So like they're
Hmm.
very like of the time.
Hmm.
um but like there's a lot of movies where it's like like a lot of these teen movies where it's sort of like middle America, or like actually a lot of them tend to take place like on the in the Northeast, right?
Yeah,
um
yeah.
but what with this one being in Seattle, it's actually plausible that these bands would be around and that she would be able to go to a venue and see them play, which is like not usually the case.
Right.
Usually it's like, why is this band that is very popular right now in this weird small town in northern Maine, right? Like this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But in
Right.
this one, it's like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. They live in Seattle, right? Like, and
Right.
so she would, if she was into music, she would very much be into the punk,
Yeah.
sort of that punk ska sort of scene, right? If either you live in the Pacific Northwest or Northern California, I think like that's a very logical place for that to
Yeah.
end up. So I think that that's informed by that a little bit. I'd
Mhm.
be curious to know, like chicken and the egg, which one of those came first in the story. Is like,
Mhm.
was it always set in Seattle, or did they have this elements of it and then they went, well, where should we set it then, right? Where because
Right.
the other part of this that's weird about it being in Seattle is that not actually a place where a lot of filming happens, right? Like we do a lot
Mhm.
in Vancouver, but Vancouver never plays itself in anything, right?
No,
Vancouver is
it's New
always
York,
used
yeah.
as an like it even like when you want to film, if your setting is Seattle, you film in Vancouver and then you go to Seattle for like a weekend and pick up a couple of shots in front of the Space Needle or downtown, right?
Right.
um but yeah, like this movie is both set and shot there, which I think is really interesting. um
Yeah, I didn't catch that from like looking at any kind of behind the scenes stuff in terms of
yeah.
what they wrote for it where it to be. I do know that it seems like in the script that they were leaning more towards Kat being interested in more traditional early 90s female punk bands,
Hmm.
whereas like obviously in the movie, it's like you said, it's more ska kind of oriented music,
Yeah.
which is more popular in that time and place. So yeah, I don't know. It could be either, but
Yeah, it's all the Discount No Doubt bands that cropped up when after No Doubt was
yeah,
so successful, right?
that's
um
right. Yep.
love it or hate it. I mean, like I am, but because of the age that I am a massive fan of No Doubt, which I have a difficult time reconciling with who Gwen Stefani has become. But that's all right. It's fine. It's
Yeah, I
fine.
loved it back then too.
Yeah, yeah. So those songs are very nostalgic for me. But yeah.
That's so funny.
So that's where my little bit of judgment there came from, of them being
Yeah.
discount No Doubt cover bands basically. But yeah, it would, like that was like the 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 alt music of the time for
Yeah,
sure.
definitely. Yeah. I think it does the job well in getting across like who Cat is and kind
Yeah,
of this alternative subculture that's going on in like teendom at the
yeah.
time.
She has to be alt enough from like the Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys that everybody else
Right.
was into, but without being alienating, right? So that's
Yes.
where like it couldn't be, that she was into like Joan Jett or something like that, which is what the character really would have been like, is
Yeah.
like you're saying, like 80s, early 90s
Yes.
femme punk, right? Like that's, it would have been more like
Yeah.
along those lines.
Yeah.
um but that would have been alienating for their core demographic, which was the
Exactly.
girl power Spice Girl generation. That's who
Yep.
they were selling this movie to, right? So you
Yep.
have to find that middle ground, which is what they found with that music.
Yeah. They did a good job at that too with Bianca's character and how, she starts out in the movie saying, I love my, I can't remember the brand, but then she's like, but I,
Skechers, her Skechers,
yeah,
she loves her Skechers. No, she likes her
like, I
Skechers, but
like,
she loves
yeah,
her Prada,
Prada
right?
backpack. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then the girl, Chastity is like, well, but I love mine. And she's like, that's because you don't have a Prada backpack. Like,
yeah,
it was so perfect. It was tiny, 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 but it was so funny for that time. But then also, her arc, Bianca's arc to, you know, not really caring about those things and, looking around at the people that truly mean something to her, like her sister and
yeah,
Cameron. It's like, okay, those things don't really matter anymore, and all
yeah,
those things were just for her to impress very specific people at the school, in the society and what it represents and all
yeah.
that. So
Well, I think it automatically puts her into the category of um who's the lead character in Clueless? Is it Cher? Is that her name?
yeah,
In
sure,
Clueless? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's like that's the sort of thing that, like, that was like a line that you would take out of the movie Clueless, and
yeah.
like, in order to establish that that's the type of character that she is, right? Um
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Totally. And that's very similar in terms of like, yeah, themes and everything for
oh,
that movie,
totally. Yeah.
which I think they handle that kind of stuff really well. I think both of those movies handle, it's not fully addressing like consumerism. It's not fully addressing like the issues in terms of like solving them
Yeah.
or providing solutions for them, but which, it's a teen movie, why would it? But it does call things out very clearly, like with when Kat, you know, says distracts them from their consumerist meaningless lives, or something like meaningless consumer driven lives.
Yeah.
And they kind of repeat that to her, or they say it before she can say it because she said it 1,000 times. But Kat's right. And
Yeah.
it's funny, like, they butt up against each other, but at the end of the story, it's like they have to accept that they're both right, and that they both can learn something from each other. Like, two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's just a very transformative narrative, I think. Which is, I always like transformative narratives. It's like my thing. So another thing I thought about a lot, which comes up a lot in Shakespeare, is kind of the theme of masks and mistaken identity. And anybody that's familiar with mistaken identity is like, typically, like, or I would say, if you know about Shakespeare, you know about mistaken identity. Like, it's
Hmm.
essential to his comedies. And basically, where it comes from is, and I promise this can, I know immediately it's like, how does this connect to 10 things? There's no mistaken identity in 10 things, but there is, and I will explain why. So in Shakespeare, obviously, Shakespeare's time, there's like no photos of people. Only certain noble people had like portraits that were made of them. And those were typically behind closed doors in private settings. So you didn't have like, you heard of people's names, you heard them described, you might have seen a portrait of them once. You might have seen them once, but you don't have like a way to confirm their identity readily on hand. So a lot of Shakespeare's plays mess with this idea of I just saw so and so in this place. Um so he's like right around the corner or whatever. And then this person who was just told that goes to find that person, but finds a person, somebody else. They know them under a different name. Oh, have you seen so and so? And this person is playing two people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let me go get him." So a lot of this happens, and it's obviously played up to be really, really funny. But thematically, what it does, it's like, how do I say this? So practically what it's doing is it's having one person pretend to be another, even around people that are familiar with their fake name or their real name. And so he does this like with twins and like Comedy of Errors. He does it 12th Night, if people are familiar with She's the Man. That was also written by Karen and Kristen. And what it does in terms of like the theme is it provides a shortcut to empathy and vulnerability. Because if you are pretending you're someone you're not, and if you're, saying like, oh, like we're pretending we're in love, or let's switch places, or, I'm going to pretend to be a nobleman when I'm actually a peasant. If you do that, and especially in fiction, you're using your imagination, you're adapting, you're improvising. It's a creative practice, which allows you to experience empathy. What if I were different? What if I were somebody else? That I could get what I wanted. But as soon as you pretend to be that person, then a part of you has become that person because you've kind of shared that experience. Typically, if you share that experience with someone else of being this other person, then you can't change that experience that happened. And now you yourself has had that experience as that other person with this other person. So it becomes a part of you. So the fun thing about like mistaken identity and what it does, it just allows people to have a mask that slowly becomes a part of who they are. And then by the end of the story, they can't necessarily, like, the mask is off, but the mask like gave them something new. It gave them a new part of who they are, and it will always stay with them. And that's what happens in this. That's what happens to Patrick. Even kind of happens to Cameron in a way because he pretends to, be her tutor. And that kind of gives him a little bit of authority in a way. It's all pretend. It's pretend authority. But there is some kind of semblance of it. He's like confident and that his plan's going to work. And because of that, she finds that attractive. She finds his confidence attractive. And that's, part of the reason why she kisses him, because he's so sure. And when Patrick and Kat, their whole thing is about trying to be themselves, like trying to stay true to who they are, despite what the world wants of them, what the world expects of them. They are hard-headed and they want to stay true to who they are. But when Patrick pretends to not let, Kat bother him and not be annoyed by her and just like keep pursuing her no matter what, then it changes who he is from the inside out. It like literally, like if you pretend to feel something you don't feel, you're gonna eventually feel it, and whether that's a literal or figurative or symbolic, that depends on the story. But yeah, my favorite lines that kind of show a lot of this is Kat saying to Bianca, you don't always have to be who they want you to be. And then Patrick says to Cameron in a different scene, don't let anyone ever make you feel like you don't deserve what you want. So Patrick is like talking about what he wants, and he's pursuing Kat in a pretend way at the time when he says this, but it automatically gives us a little insight to what Patrick actually wants because he keeps pursuing Kat.
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing with like Kat DeBianca, you don't always have to be who they want you to be. And when she's talking about they, it's loaded, like it's very much loaded. It's not about her dad, it's about Joey, it's about the other kids at school, it's about society. But she is slowly, in that moment, she's slowly breaking down her walls to really ask herself, well, who do I want to be? And that's, she wants to be a musician and she wants someone to lean on. She wants someone to support her. So it's like, yeah, they're both really like headstrong and all that, but this is what helps them gravitate towards each other through the story, is because they're actually really, 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 really similar. And that's also called out with Patrick. He says, so what's your excuse? Kat says 4. And he goes, acting the way we do. He doesn't say acting the way you do. He says acting the way we do.
Yeah.
Like, why are you antisocial? Why do you act like this? Why do you push people away? Like, why do we do this? And again, it's holding a mirror up to himself ultimately, because he wants to know what she says, because he thinks he knows how he feels, but it's going to make him understand more if he hears it coming from her. I think that's really lovely.
Yeah. There's an interesting self-awareness to his character, right? Like I said before, when she points out his self-assuredness, and he's like, yeah, like, but like he's like, there's a maturity to his character that the other characters don't have. We don't really get the backstory. We get a little tiny bit of it when he tells her where he was for that missing year, right?
Yeah.
And so we you can draw a conclusion of tragedy to that, of like, well, my grandfather was really ill, so I went and spent the year on his couch, eating SpaghettiOs or whatever. And it's like, well, that came to an end at some point. And
also he had to act as an adult to take care of his grandfather. Like, were there no other adults available?
Yeah. So I think you can draw the conclusion of like, well, that ended in tragedy. His grandfather died. Like,
right.
Yeah. And then he came back and he's this dark person and all of that stuff. But it's just, it is to keep people at a distance so that he doesn't have to show them that vulnerability. Right.
Yeah.
But it's because, the whole time it's like he is being hired to date her is actually giving him permission to be the person that he actually is, right? Like this person that he says that he's pretending to be is actually the person without the mask, right? Like it's actually the mask off. And we see that in those moments. You pointed out the moment when he says to Cameron, like, don't let anybody tell you that you can't go after what you want, right? Like, like that's the real person. That whole sequence from the party is like that's the real Patrick throughout that, right? In the midst of everybody else, they've got their facades on full up because it's a social situation, right? So everybody's pretending to be something that they're not. But that's funny because it's in the moment when he sort of drops everything, because everybody's drunk, so he doesn't have to protect himself anymore, right? Like there's a as a person who does not drink and who has never really drank, I can tell you that, like, to be the sober person at a house party, you get a very interesting perspective on everybody else. But
that's very true.
I asked Crystal last night, I was like, is this even a thing anymore? Like, do kids do this? Like, because I just don't hear about, like, ragers going on anymore. I don't know. Has social media kind of destroyed it? Because I think that it has.
I think so. Yeah.
Because there's no anonymity, right? Like, you can't go to a house party, and it's like, well, there would be pictures on social media the next day, and I don't know, the
That's
legality of it
literally,
would be tricky, but
oh, that's literally like in college, when me and my now husband were dating, uh, we had gone back home to our hometown, and we had just recently started dating, and I didn't know where he was one night, and then the next morning a picture popped up on Facebook that he was in. Um, and it was a rager, I'll tell you that. it
yeah.
was it was definitely a rager, and I like it was one of the many times that we were like, okay, what's like, let's figure this out, like, you know but poor guy didn't even want to be there. He was drugged there by one of his friends, and then he had
Yeah.
this awful incriminating photo of him on the internet the next day. So that was just the beginning, I think, of the end of ragers.
Yeah.
Actually, and to tell you, it wasn't just it was a no clothes party. They used to do
Ooh.
those. Did you ever hear of those?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I've seen pictures.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
so have I.
Yeah.
But no, I've never been to one. But yeah, it's like still, even I think that was in 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was still going on. But yeah, I think social media essentially killed it, which is unfortunate because, people, mistakes are mistakes. You should make all your mistakes then,
Mm.
ultimately, like in a safe way. Um, but I don't, yeah, some people will disagree with that. But yeah, it's really funny. Watching it last night, I was like, yeah, like this is realistic in a way. Like, obviously you don't have a DJ.
Yeah.
Not everyone's drinking necessarily out of solo cups. They're drinking out of whatever they can get their hands on. And it was probably a lot more sloppy and weird and awkward. But yeah, like that's pretty much dead.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Weirdly
house
enough.
parties were never as much fun as everybody expected them to be. It ended up
No,
just being a
no.
bunch of people drunk shouting things, and then other people just sort of sitting in corners
I
wondering
had
how
some
long
good
they have
ones
to
in
be there for.
college. College was great. High school? No, 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 no.
Yeah, no, the high school ones are terrible. The high school ones are awful. But American Pie and 10 Things I Hate About You and like all these movies made us think that we were supposed to be at these parties every weekend, and that
They
if you
did.
weren't at the party, then you were uncool. Uh,
It was a thing. It
yeah,
really was. Like, yeah, it's so strange. But yeah, so that was a fun
yeah,
segue. I just have a couple more notes until we
yeah,
can get to like kind of our big summary about the Heath Ledger series, which I'm excited about. So yeah, I think like the ultimate thing about everybody kind of, and I usually say this when I talk about like hero's journey and kind of the mythology of love stories. When you decide to like go on a journey, you could either be doing it reluctantly or, with Kat, it kind of happens to her that he kind of pulls her along on this journey. With Patrick, he is, you know, the reluctant hero being dragged into something, but ultimately, like, he does make a choice to go along with it.
hmm,
Um, and same thing with Bianca and Cameron. They at some point they make this choice to be on this journey together, and what happens is you bump into this other person. And I love this part of heroes journeys. I think it's kind of the most spectacular part of heroes journeys that have a love story, is the bumping up against someone and challenging them, you know and being like, I don't like this about this person. I don't like this about this person, but I like this person,
hmm,
right? It's totally ironic. It doesn't make any sense. It Because what's happening to you is like you're either projecting, like you're seeing a part of yourself in this other person that bothers you because you're seeing a part of yourself that you haven't contended with, you haven't completely resolved it or whatever. Or it's the opposite of you and you don't understand it, and that bothers you because typically these stories about young people and they still haven't experienced a lot of the world, and something that's different is going to be frustrating because they don't understand it, and they thought that they understood a lot of these things.
yeah,
So ultimately, love is ironic, and her ending poem that she says, which is totally not the same thing at all as the source material. It's saying that except for the fact that it's ironic, right? Because
Mhm.
the original was ironic. It's saying that I hate all these things about you. Like all of these things. I I despise them. I despise your combat boots, the way that you drive my car, etc., etc. But I don't hate you. Like, and yet I don't hate you. And it's like
Yeah.
there's a quote from like a book, if anybody's familiar with Patrick Rothfuss, The Name of the Wind and The Wise Man's Fear, which I guess he's never going to finish it, but we've been waiting for years. There's a quote that where he says, where the main character quote says that to love a person despite, right?
Mhm.
Despite. That's what true love actually is. And that's exactly what's being expressed in this poem, is that, you know, I hate all these things about you, but despite that, like, you know, I still love you.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lovely way to kind of transcend the old narrative. It's a transformative story even without like thinking of the meta, uh the meta of the original source material existing, because you know what makes it meta is the idea that you're adapting the source material, so people are going and thinking one thing, and they're coming out going like, well, that's not the same story, but it it is structurally the same story,
Mhm.
except for the tail within a tail. But it's transformative and it's transcending the original narrative by having Kat actually fall in love, and their courtship being about them breaking down each other's vulnerabilities and kind of in a way like taming each other because they were
Mhm.
both shrewish, you know? So,
I think the connection back into the source material comes. You have to bring the relationship with the father into it, right? Because
mhm,
the dad is very domineering, right? Like he's very controlling. And one of the humorous aspects of that is that Kat is much more like him than she wants to admit, because she, like, the thing about Patrick that she ends up being in love with, that when she talks about all of these things that drive her nuts, these things that she hates, a lot of it is to do with his independence, right?
mhm,
It's a lot of it is to do with the way that he is not conforming. He doesn't just do things because other people expect him to. Um, in fact, he can tend to be a little bit counter to that, which is exactly the same person that she is, right?
exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so you're saying, like, it's the things that she sees in herself that she's actually kind of like, that everybody else criticizes about her. So she sees it in him. And so it drives her nuts, right? Because
yeah,
she's been told that they're bad things. Um,
mhm,
but it is that conversation that she has with her dad on the porch, where he comes in, he talks about, it's like, your sister still lets me play a few innings. I've been on the bench with you, and now I won't even be able to watch the game, right? Like,
yeah,
and it's so funny because, obviously when this movie came out, 1999, I was like 14 years old. Now I am 38. I will be 39 in a few months. I'm approaching my 40s. I watch movies like this, and then if it's a well written parent, I find myself relating very hard to the things that they're saying. Now,
yeah.
I do not intend to be the type of girl dad that Mr. Dr. Stratford. We should be respectful. He is a doctor. He is an OB, obviously. I don't intend to be that controlling. As a matter of fact, my approach to it is I will just teach them to handle themselves, and then should they choose to end up with boys, I will just have sympathy for those boys, because if they try and do anything that they shouldn't be doing,
Mhm,
they'll probably end up regretting it. But
yeah,
that's my approach, is that I'll just give them
yeah,
the tools to handle themselves, which
yeah,
is ultimately what their dad is doing. He just
mhm,
goes about it from a very comically pig-headed way, right?
yeah,
Um, But what he comes to her at the end and says is like, I have to let go of this control, but I want you to understand how difficult that is.
Hmm.
And it's because that control isn't coming from a place disrespect or you know, hatred, or even like looking down upon. It is coming from the place that a father's love comes from, which is protection, right? And
Yeah.
um like it, because it is your job. I mean, I have this conversation with my girl. There's so little right now, but even still, you know, you're telling them to stop doing something, do like hey, get down from there, don't do that, don't, like that's dangerous.
Hmm.
And then they're like, they have the attitude of like, you're just being controlling, or they don't have words for it, but they do still have that attitude of like, stop telling me what to do. And
Hmm.
it's like, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm trying to teach you how to not make mistakes, right?
Hmm.
And you, like you said before, it's like we have to make mistakes, it's part of growing up. But
Right.
as a parent, you still like, you have that very, very bad job of having to protect somebody who wants to put themselves in danger constantly.
Yeah.
um so he comes to her and he's like, listen, like this is difficult, it's hard. And at a certain point, and he doesn't have the context of it because he doesn't know the story with Joey, but he obviously recognizes that it happened, something happened, she changed, the mom left, this happened, obviously these happened very close together. um and so, you know, like he's like at a certain point you just started taking care of yourself, and so I
Yeah.
become obsolete. And when I become obsolete, especially like this is very much a part of male identity within a family hierarchy, is like, if I am not of use, then I am useless, right?
Yeah. Right.
So like if there are not things that I can check off a checklist that I'm doing, then what is the point of my existence? I don't have a use in the family anymore.
Yeah.
I am not loved anymore, right? So that's where he's
Hmm.
coming from. And she's very much like that. So her relationship with Patrick is very much like you will not be controlled. Yet I want to control everything around me. I want to control the classroom, and that's why my teacher hates me. I want to control my relationship with my sister, and that's why she hates me. I want, like, she's constantly trying to control the environment. And
Right.
then here comes Patrick, who is like, I will not be controlled. As a matter of fact, I'm going to run counter to everything that you want me to do. I'm going to show up in places unexpectedly. I am going to know what you're going to say before you say it, which is really frustrating, right? Like he comes in and like, you know, upsets the apple
Shake.
cart, right?
Yeah, it
Like,
shakes things up. Yeah.
yeah,
Totally.
which she hates, but also needs and wants. And
Yes.
ultimately her surrender, which is the where it ties back into the source material. There was a long walk to get back to this, but her surrender, like her father's surrender, is letting go of that control, right?
Yeah.
So in the source material, the surrender is the farce of, oh, you like, we should, you know, let your husband be your king, sort of thing. But
Hmm.
in this one, in this modern context of 1999, contemporary, we should say, it's no longer modern. um so in the contemporary context of 1999 for this story, that looks like, I actually should allow other people to take care of me. I should
Yes.
allow my father to take care of me. I should allow my sister to take care of me. I should allow my partner to take care of me, right? So
Hmm.
that's ultimately what she has to let go of. And that's, I think, where the breakdown comes when she's reading her poem,
Hmm.
is her realization of like, I actually like, and that's vulnerability, right? Allowing somebody
Yep.
else to nurture and care for you is allowing somebody else to see your weakness, right?
Oh
um
yeah.
and then
100%.
and then he meets that, right? Like the next scene with them is him meeting that and be like, I bought you the guitar, right? Which is like something that she was unable to do for herself, not because financially she couldn't, right? But because she couldn't tell her dad this is what I want. This is what I want to
Right.
be. Right.
Right.
Despite all of this independence that she has, she can't actually voice that truth. And then he goes out, like takes that extra step and goes like, well, if you're going to be in a band, you're going to need a guitar. And so, it's him prostrating himself as well. He's saying like, I like, forgive me. All of the money that I got, he gave me $300. I bought you this guitar. Right. Like, so yeah, I did the bad thing, but here I've used it to not for myself. Like
Yeah.
he's, it's a very nice way of actually wrapping that up
It
from a
is.
writing perspective, right? Because there's
Yeah.
no explanation needed. It's just like it's a single action, and no words are exchanged in him really being like, I took the money and I did the right thing, and like he doesn't, he just says like, well, I had this money lying around, sort of thing,
Yeah.
and he does the right thing with it.
It also communicates that like it's Joey's money. So
Mhm.
immediately you're like, oh, this also resolves a little bit in the thematic way, like
Yeah,
about what Joey did to Kat,
yeah,
because
yeah,
the money gets back around to her.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
it's great. It does. It wraps it up
It's
with a
it's
little
healing.
bow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's very good. Yeah. So I don't know. That's I think that's the male perspective that I can bring
I think
is
that was
and
really
that
interesting.
father's
Yeah.
perspective. But that's when I watched it, I was like, that's sort of what I got there at the end. I actually really like that scene with the dad, like
Me
because
too.
he's all, if not for the comedy and if not for that scene, he would be villainous, right? But
Hmm.
he's not. And this is one of the things that I actually really like about the whole movie is that there actually isn't a bad guy as much as like Joey is an antagonist. He's never a villain, right?
Right.
He is, he doesn't understand the damage that he's doing. He's ignorant to it, which isn't a good thing. It's not a redeeming quality and it's not an excuse, but uh it allows us to be a little bit sympathetic to him. It's like, well, he's an idiot,
Yeah. He's
right?
just
Like,
stupid. Yeah. Exactly.
and
Exactly.
and then Chastity similarly is like, when she basically betrays Bianca, it's like, well, she's stupid too, right? Like, and like we've seen that throughout the story, is that like she is the thing that Michael at the beginning actually like calls Bianca,
Yes.
right? Like this very big.
Yes. Well,
So
because Bianca's moved on. I mean, Bianca
yeah,
has learned from her relationship with Cameron, like what it means to actually
yeah,
care about someone else and look after someone else and all of that. Whereas, like before, she was just and like Chastity and Joey just focusing on these materialistic things,
yeah.
and wanting other people to like them for like this fake persona as opposed to liking them for who they really are. So
Because Shakespeare loves a foil, right? Like
yes.
I mean, so do I. Like, it is, I think, one of the most effective literary devices is to have, like, in order to show us where our hero is at, we have to have the counterpart. We have to have the antithesis,
Hmm.
but it has to be representative, right? Like, it's because it's the clearest way to show
Hmm.
that somebody has either fallen from grace or risen to new heights, right? Like, is to have that comparison, to have that other character, that we compare them to and go like, oh, look how far our hero has come compared to this person that they were exactly like at the beginning of the story. um
Yeah, because there's also like a power vacuum now because like if Bianca steps down from being this perfect pretty princess,
yeah,
then that Chastity's right there waiting to fill it up. That's also a pretty common theme, especially in these stories. Yeah.
totally.
Yep.
Cool.
So
That, does that bring us to the end? Does that bring us to the wrap up of our Heath Ledger trilogy here?
it does, and I have some things that I would love like to summarize like this
Yeah,
kind of journey that we've been on, which I think it was a brilliant idea. Thanks for the
yeah.
Thanks for the push to do this. This was so much fun. But yeah, so let's talk about kind of what these movies sort of have in common, and how to like if you ever go and try to watch like the trilogy, like how you should kind of go about like watching it or thinking about it as you're watching it, because I think that it makes it so much more. Um, it's so much more of like an exercise. It's like you get a lot out of it if you
Hmm.
if you can kind of think about these things that they have in common. So obviously we talked about the fact that has the mistaken identity and the masks and all of that. They have that in common. All three movies, they draw on like similar themes in general. Like they all have historical context or like some sort of historical fictional context. Uh, and like, so we'll go back to A Knight's Tale, which was, the historical fiction was the Canterbury Tales
Mhm.
from the 1390s. Casanova was obviously based on Casanova's life and his legend, mostly like the fictional legend of Casanova from the 1700s, and then Taming of the Shrew, or 10 Things in Taming of the Shrew, from the 1590s. So obviously very different points in time, but ultimately, are in terms of like movies that were made during, like in Heath Ledger's time on Earth, like it's fascinating that he ended up in
Mhm.
all these films. Really fascinating. And mythologically, we talked about the, what it means to kind of put on a mask and to have like this mistaken identity theme. It's about like, finding your true self. You haven't found your true self. You're not willing to see who they are yet. You haven't found a person that's your mirror yet. You haven't found someone that you can voice things to that kind of bounce back at you and go, wait a minute, like this is who I actually am. And so going back to Knight's Tale, we have like William Thatcher. He pretends to be a knight when he was actually a peasant, right? And then by the end of the story, he becomes a knight. And then you have Casanova, who's pretending to be a nobleman and a philosopher when he was actually a seductress and a heretic. And then by the end of the story, he becomes a lover and an actor, which we talked about when we talked about Casanova, that he was always really an actor, right? Because he was playing different roles
Mhm.
and pretending to be all these different people. So all those things kind of become a part of him by the end of it. And now we have Patrick, who pretends to be amused by Kat's pointed words when he actually dislikes how she acts. But by the end of the story, he falls in love with her. And the great part about this one is that what he becomes, because this is not his story, this is Kat's story, he becomes Kat's. So that's the role that he plays here, is that he becomes kind of like her trophy.
Mhm.
It kind of flips that story, right? It flips the hero's journey. If he falls in love with a woman and he gets her in the end as a reward for being chivalrous, as a reward for being like a good person, this flips it, and it's like, yeah, this was a really rough journey. It was hard to get here, and now we've broken down these two enough to where they can have each other. And but most importantly, um, Kat has someone that she can really lean on and be a partner with. So all of these characters transcend in the end, just like their stories are transformative. Their contemporary stories that Heath Ledger is in are transformative compared to the original story it's based on. The stories themselves, their contemporary stories, are transcendent because they take someone and they go on this whole journey and they incorporate these things into themselves. It's the whole hero's journey thing. And then by the end, we transcend for that character and also for the story itself. So it's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
I do want to mention too, if you want like I would say like a bonus, like an honorable mention to kind of encapsulate this whole trilogy, go watch the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus,
Mhm.
because it's the same story, except that Heath Ledger died while making it, and other male actors had to fill in for him, and they wrote into the story that this character that he was playing, his face would change when he fell into the Imaginarium, and so he literally has a mask on that are different actors playing the same character. But before it was supposed to just be Heath Ledger. So really interesting that he played these kinds of roles, I think, and I think it says a lot about him as an actor. A lot of people say that he was always, he had like an older soul, you know, and he like packed a lot of
Mhm.
life into a very short amount of time on Earth. And one of the cute stories that the Kristen and Karen told was that when they first met Heath, he was only 18. He had just turned 19 for the actual filming of the movie. So he was actually, you know, he was pretty young to be in a high school
Mhm.
movie, because usually actors are into their 20s. And they were at a bar, and he was able to go up to the bartender and order beers for everyone and never get carded. No one would ask him anything. No one would
Mhm.
question him, just because his confidence and his swagger, you know, just no one cared. So I don't know. He's an interesting man. I'm kind of obsessed with his creativity and his like time here, and it's sad that like, yeah, it's sad that he didn't get to go on and create more things that he wanted to do, because he was just starting to get into, you know, making his own stuff.
Yeah.
But
This is to just kind of drive your point home, and
mhm,
this thing about him being an old soul,
mhm,
and having that sort of a mystique about him. He was 28 when he died.
yeah,
28. Like I
but
can't,
he,
like that is such a short amount of time.
I know,
That is so young. That is so tragic. And like you think about like the movies that he had done right before he died. You're talking about
yeah,
The Dark Knight, and Imaginarium. He does not come across in The Dark Knight as a 28-year-old as the
no,
Joker, right? Like
no,
that, like because I think about a 28-year-old, and if I think about a 28-year-old, I'm like, ooh, a 28-year-old, they don't know anything, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
um yeah, like he didn't even make it to his 30s.
mhm,
I that it is such a
mhm,
tragedy, and we are robbed of so much by
yeah,
virtue of that, you know, because he would have gone on to tell such great stories, I think. But
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a great documentary about his life on Prime Video that
Mhm.
I thought it was excellent. I think it's the only one, a full, you know, fully produced documentary about his life, and it's fascinating just seeing that how much he was trying to work with like indie artists, and how much he was trying to do
Mhm.
his own thing and have creative freedom. Why he took the roles that he took were ultimately, you know, they're usually about working, you know, with people who wanted to do different things, or you know,
Mhm.
people who are marginalized and whatnot. And yeah, he had a lot to bring to the table. He had, you know, a crazy mind that constantly was going, and I think, and that's ultimately what led to his death, because
Mhm.
he was taking, you know, certain things that would keep him up, because he just could not stop. And yeah, it's like it is unfortunate. I think that, you know, like I said before, he had packed so much into like a short amount of time,
Mhm.
that we're so blessed with like all of the stuff that he's left, that I can still watch these movies and think, "Oh my god, like I didn't catch that before," or "I didn't think about this," just based on his performance alone,
Yeah.
because he really is like an incredible actor, and he packs so much into like the smallest things. It's not even like, you know, we talk about Adam Driver has these like micro expressions that are brilliant, but Heath Ledger has a charisma about him that is
Mhm.
no one no one can no one can compare, honestly. So but yeah, so Heath Ledger trilogy series.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Good stuff.
this has been so much fun. I just got a 5-minute warning. I that chaos is about
Okay.
to erupt in my house. But
We
it's
talked
perfect
forever.
timing. It's
We
perfect
talked
timing.
forever.
So
Yeah.
we're good. No, this was awesome. The great thing now is that whatever perfect 10 we do next, the field is wide open. So
Ooh,
because
fun.
we've completed this task. Um, but yeah, this it was so much fun. It was so great to have you back again. I as always, I will again, as I did at the beginning of the episode, recommend that everybody go check out Ty's videos over on YouTube, on the Wit and Folly channel, because there's just so much there to dig into. Your latest one, the shark, is that your latest one? The one
Yeah.
about sharks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
I uh It's fantastic. I too love shark movies, so it was
Yeah.
such a great deep dive, pun intended, on that one,
Mm-hmm.
into that genre. Um, and
Thanks.
that there's more there than I think people give it credit for as a genre.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
really starting with Jaws, but going into all this other stuff. So people
Mm-hmm.
should go check that out for sure. As well as, obviously, there's so much great Raylo stuff that you've done.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
Digging into that. So go check all that out. Is there anything else that you want people to check out?
No, that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much
I'm
it.
in a hiatus right now, so but my last
Yeah.
video, go watch it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, just go back, watch all of them, watch everything from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, why not?
I Awesome. And listen to, if you haven't listened to our other two episodes, our Knight's Tale and Casanova episodes, definitely do that. They are
Yes.
really, really fun.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Well, I will just end on this note. I This episode is coming out in February of 2024. We're in the middle of our Patreon pledge drive. Um, Up on Patreon right now. It's funny because we're recording this, like, this is actually before I've recorded anything else for the pledge drive. But it won't come out until later in the month. Pretty much one of the last things that'll come out in the month. But I That just means that by the time that you're listening to this, if you're on the free feed, the podcast feed, and not on Patreon, there is a whole whack of bonus stuff on Patreon now, specifically for the pledge drive. And one of those things is a Perfect 10 exclusive episode that is only on Patreon. You got to go over to patreon.com/thunderquack in order to get it. And that is Amanda Conkin, my co-host from Quiver the Green Arrow podcast, and I talking about the Perfect 10 that everybody always asks me if I'm going to do, and that is Star Wars, specifically A New Hope. So we're doing our perfect, or we have done time travel. I Because I actually record it tomorrow night, but we will have done. It is already released to you guys. Our Perfect 10 for Star Wars: A New Hope. Alongside that will be a Perfect 10 pop quiz on Star Wars, and then we've got a whole bunch of other great content. That is also there. Basically, every active podcast on the network has a bonus episode available right now. So that's Perfect 10, Force Perspectives, the ThunderQuack podcast, Rebel Cells, Wampa's Lair, The Saga Continues, all have bonus episodes that are up there. Epic Marvel podcast is another one. And then on top of that, we've got some other stuff, other bonuses and that sort of thing, that'll be out as well, and some new stuff that we're doing. So one of those is the book club, which we're doing over on our Discord. So if you go to thunderquack.com/Discord, you'll get the invite to our Discord server, and you can join us there for our book club that we're going to be starting up. And patrons get exclusive access to like basically our bi-monthly hangout that we'll do to discuss those books. So that's a really cool new patron perk that we're launching this month. And if we've hit, I hope that by this point we've hit some of our milestones, but one of them, the first one, at $250 a month, is the Perfect 10 minutes, which is shorter episodes of Perfect 10, no guest. So for now, for this first batch, it'll just be me doing them. But I'm basically opening it up to anybody who's ever been on Perfect 10 and anybody who's part of ThunderQuack to record their own Perfect 10 minutes. And it is just a 10-minute bite-sized Perfect 10 on whatever. So the first one that I'm going to put out is on a movie that is super important to me, which is The Last Starfighter. So hopefully we've hit that goal, and if we've hit that goal, then that will be released as well. So but that'll, you know what, like, if we hit that goal, that may have been released before this episode even gets out, because that'll be on the regular feed. So we've got that. We got a bunch of other goals that we're trying to hit, and that's just really to support the network and all of the other podcasts, along with the ones that I do, that are on the network, and just grow it and grow the community and all of that sort of thing. So if you can, head over to patreon.com/ThunderQuack and help us out over there. And if not, then you can help us by just going and doing the rating and review thing on whatever podcast service, especially iTunes. It's really helpful. But even more than that, sharing the podcast with other people. So those recommendations, those referrals, do more than any other kind of marketing that we can do. So if there's an episode that you enjoyed, that you have some friends that you think that they'd enjoy it, please share it and help us get these podcasts out to more people. Our audience is so small right now, but I just know that if we just sort of like reach the right people, that the stuff that we've been doing, we've got some really, really good episodes of Perfect 10 that I'm really proud of. So I just trying to get those out there to people and grow that audience, grow that community as much as possible. But that's it. That's the episode. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Ty, once again for being with me on this one.
Thank you.
And I mean, obviously, we'll have you. You'll be back. You'll be back before the end of the year, I'm sure. We'll do another one. Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. If you found joy in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast service and leave a rating or review. If you want to chat about today's episode, head over to the Discord, as I mentioned before, thunderquack.com/Discord. And until next time, remember, it's not about the score. It's about the love. Stay geeky, everyone. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohen. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 pop quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.